Hello and welcome to everyone to this live streaming. My name is Aurelio Porfiri. I am a musician and a writer, and today we will discuss about one of my recent books, and the book is called A Future in Tradition, Remembering Michael Davies. Michael Davies was a great protagonist of the word that we call traditionalist in a way that probably is not so good definition, but maybe we will discuss this tonight. And I am very glad that for this program I am joined by a very good group of scholars and experts. So let me introduce to you our guest. So first of all close to me, not in the sense of the first among the others, but because he's close to me, is Peter Kwasniewski, that is a writer and a scholar. So thank you, Peter, for joining the program.
Thank you.
And then we have Joseph Shaw from UK, that is the chairman of the Latin Mass Society, also a scholar and writer. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we have Jules Gomez, that is the Rome correspondent for Church Militant, and also in his own regards also a scholar and a writer. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, we have Father Thomas Kosick, that is a priest from Massachusetts and also a writer on liturgical things. Thank you, Father, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So I want first, before starting, I want to show you the book that we are talking about, A Future in Tradition, Remembering Michael Davies. And I want to say something about how this book came about. Many years ago, almost 20 years ago, I was working for a liturgical magazine that we may say more on the progressive side, we can say, to be fair. And but because I was already going to the Tridentine Mass here in Italy, so I made a proposal to them, and I say, why we don't make an interview to traditionalist, so that we can have also the other side of the story, not only listening to our side or their side, because at the time I was already appreciative of the Latin Mass. So one of my friends here told me that they have the Una Voce General Assembly in the Domus Mariae, that is a big house for retreat here in Rome. And I say, oh, if you want, I can introduce you to Michael Davies. Of course, I knew already Michael Davies because of his books. And I said, oh, yes, I would be very glad. And so I brought with me the two sisters that were in charge of this very well spread magazine. And so we met Michael Davies, and we have a very nice conversation. And I told him, so can I make an interview with you? Maybe I will send you 10 questions, and then you can answer me, and then I will translate, and then we will publish in this magazine. Okay. Michael Davies, he gave me some books of his books as a gift, and he was very, very kind. I have to say, very kind, very humble. So after a few months, he sent me an email, and he sent me very long answers, very long. I mean, like 8 pages, 8 word pages of answers, so very, very long. And maybe for this reason, and also because his text was very strong, the magazine decided not to publish it. So this interview remain always never published. And this is the reason why I say, okay, I will introduce this interview in a book where I can also speak about the cultural environment of Michael Davies. This book is not a biography of Michael Davies. I know that Leo Darroch is writing a biography of Michael Davies, so that will be, of course, more appropriate for a biography. But this is a book that only speak about certain issues that Michael Davies treat in his writings. And also there is this interview that I think is very precious. So I think you can be happy to read this book, because it will give you an idea. It's like an introduction to Michael Davies. Then, of course, you can go and find these other books. I'm not sure that if his own books are republished in the English words or not, or are out of catalog. Maybe you can tell me this, because you would know better than me. But so this is the reason for this book, and I'm very glad that I can speak with you about this topic. So I want to start with Peter Kwasniewski, and I want to ask you. I forgot to say that Peter Kwasniewski, he wrote the foreword for the book, so he's certainly someone very appreciative. Now we have also Father Finnegan, so I introduce him, and then so we are everyone is here. Hello, Father, can you hear me? We are live.
Yes, thank you. I can hear you.
Oh, okay. So we have also Father Tim Finnegan from UK that join us now, and of course we are very glad that he can make it, and thank you for joining us. So I was talking with Peter, and Peter, so I want to tell you, when I write to you and I mentioned to you we are friends for some time, so we talk sometimes, we correspond, and I told you, oh, you know, I wrote a book about Michael Davies, and you told me, oh, you were very enthusiastic, and you say, oh, he's one of my hero. You say to me, no? So can you tell us why for you is so important Michael Davies?
Well,
Sure. So Michael Davies, I only met him once. I wish I had a longer friendship with him, but obviously he only came to the United States on certain occasions to give lectures. I was a young graduate student. He came to Northern Virginia, I think it was Arlington, Virginia, to give a lecture on the Vendée, which those who are familiar with Michael Davies and the traditionalist movement in general will know how important the subject of the rising in the Vendée against the French revolutionaries was and is to all of us. In fact, I have on my little my Sacred Heart pin, lapel pin here, for that reason. So Michael gave a lecture on the Vendée, which was, I'm sure, part of what entered into this book of his, For Altar and Throne, that he published later on. I met him after the lecture. I found it very inspiring. I introduced myself. We talked for a few minutes, and I asked him if I could send him a letter. And he said, sure. So he gave me his mailing address. And then I wrote to him a few weeks later, and I said, dear Mr. Davies, I would like to do what you're doing. I'd like to go around. I'd like to write books on the traditional liturgy, defending it, explaining it. I'd like to go and give lectures and so on. How can I do this? How can I make a full-time career out of this? And a few weeks passed. And then I got a response from him, and he said, "It's wonderful to hear of your enthusiasm. I approve of it. Keep pursuing that." But he said, "You'll never make a career out of that. You can't do that. You have to go and get a job. You need to be a teacher." And then he said, "This is what I recommend: go and get an advanced degree, or finish your advanced degree, your doctorate, and get a good teaching position, and have a good career that way. And then in your spare time, pursue your apostolate, on behalf of the traditional liturgy. So I did that for 25 years. I was doing all of my advocacy for the TLM on the side, and for sacred music and so on. And then it just so happened a couple of years ago that it finally became possible for me to launch out and go full time doing that work, which I had dreamt of doing all the way back the first time I met Michael Davies. So essentially, he's an inspiration for me. He is somebody who, when the church was in shambles, and the church still seems to be in shambles, but especially in the 70s and 80s, when things were really awful almost everywhere, he was a light shining in the darkness. He was somebody who was carrying the torch when very few other people were carrying it. And so in that sense, I think all of us are hugely indebted to Michael Davies.
Thank you very much. And I want to go to Joseph Shaw. Joseph, you are the chairman of the Latin Mass Society, so you know quite well the situation in UK and in the British world. And I want to know, according to your opinion, what is the legacy of Michael Davies? So what today, you still own to him?
Yes, well, he's a legendary figure here in England. It's something that everyone does when they discover the traditional mass, is that they have to go away and read Michael's books. It's like a kind of the kind of the bridge you have to cross in order to start learning about these things. And I think it's an interesting fact that traditional Catholics tend to be more well informed about the recent history of the church and their own movement than Catholics of other schools of thought. And Michael Davies has really made it possible for people to get into that in a very painless way, because he's such a fluent writer, so easy to understand, and explains things so well.
Thank you very much. I want to go to Father Kosick. Father, I want to ask you this. You are familiar with the work of Michael Davies, and I want to know in what way the work of Michael Davies shape your liturgical ideas, if they contribute to shape your ideas.
They greatly contributed. His writing strongly influenced my own thoughts about the sacred liturgy. I have these small books and booklets in hand that I read as a young man or while in the seminary, and they left an impression on me. His argument that the ideals of the liturgical movement of the 20th century could have been realized without destroying the Roman liturgy, without breaking its backbone. His argument for worship ad orientem, he strongly influenced my own thoughts. Not only Michael Davies, but Klaus Gamber and, of course, Joseph Ratzinger. I found their arguments quite compelling.
Thank you. Jules Gomez, I know that you come from, you are converted to Catholicism, no? So you come from an Anglican background, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Okay, I want to know, when you were Anglican, do you have any notion about Michael Davies, or you just discover him in recent times, and what is this discovery giving to you?
Well, I discovered him, interestingly, over the last 6 months, and I discovered him, as one does nowadays, on YouTube. His lectures were profound. They were incisive. They were impressive. I was looking for a traditionalist viewpoint on Vatican II, and nobody could deliver the goods better than Michael Davies on Vatican II. I think I listened to 4 lectures of his on Vatican II. Some of it was on the liturgy. I listened to 2 other specialist lectures on the liturgy. I then began to read what he had written. And I was deeply moved because he himself was a convert coming from a Welsh background and converting from evangelicalism, which was my own background, Anglicanism, to Catholicism. And it was such a refreshing and wonderful introduction to traditionalism in the Catholic Church, to the Latin Mass, and most importantly, I think, to the errors of Vatican II and the iconoclasm directed against the Tridentine Mass. So I'd like to say I'm going to go back and listen to those very lectures again and again and again, because you can keep listening and not get fed up.
Thank you very much. Father, I want to ask you, what is your experience with Michael Davies? Can you share with us what is your how you met his work or him, and what is your what he gives to you? Father, can you hear me? Yeah, you mute your microphone, I think. Yes, now.
Yeah,
It's okay.
sorry.
Yes.
There are two fathers.
Yeah, can you hear my question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sure. Yes, I knew Michael. I'm glad to say I knew him as a small boy. He used to come and visit our house. He was a colleague of my father's and taught in the same local authority. And one of the things that struck me in your book was that you also mentioned Michael's work in Catechetics. And in the late 70s, I think that probably was a major part of his work. He and my father produced a dossier on catechetics. They were extremely concerned about the so-called new catechetics. And as you might expect, if you ever met Michael, he was a great deal of fun. And they used to go to meetings which were set up by the modernist new catechists. And they realized fairly soon that none of them would be asked to speak if they sat together and were identifiable as a group. And therefore, they used to arrive at the meetings, pretend not to know each other, all sit in separate parts of the room, so that if one of them was speaking about Orthodox teaching and the need for it, the chairman, usually one of the sort of official apparatchiks, and somebody from New Church, so to speak, he would stop them and say, no, there's a gentleman at the back who's been waiting to speak for a while. And of course, it would turn out to be another Orthodox and traditional speaker. And so they got very frustrated with all of this. And eventually, Michael attempted to sign up for one of these catechetical meetings. And he was very proud and hugely amused to get a phone call asking him, "Are you the Michael Davies?" To which, of course, he had to answer yes. But here my father eventually managed to get a notorious modernist institution, Corpus Christi College, closed when they went to see Cardinal Heenan and took him a leaflet which was entitled, "Never say Jesus is God, full stop." So his work on catechetics was extremely important for him in those early years. But of course, with his trilogy on Archbishop Lefebvre and his trilogy on the Mass, I read those, and as a young priest was not, I didn't say the traditional Mass and thought, well, the important thing was to say the Novus Ordo and to say it very reverently. Eventually, my mind was changed by actually on one occasion saying the traditional Latin Mass. Michael, who had come to my ordination in the New Rite, against which, of course, he wrote a wonderful book describing all its deficiencies, nevertheless, he regarded it as valid. He came to my ordination, and then later he came to the first Mass, which I said, and I continued to know him very well as a priest. And I remember the most important thing once that he said to me, challenging me about the New Rite. Once I'd learned to say the old rite, he said, well, in Vatican II, it says that nothing in the liturgy of the church should be changed unless the good of the church certainly and necessarily requires it. And so he bore down on me and said, can you name a single change in the Novus Ordo that the good of the church certainly and necessarily required? And I had to answer, well, Michael, no. So he was great fun. He was a great man. not only in his defense of the traditional liturgy, but also, and as something foundational to him as well, in his defense of sound teaching, particularly in the teaching of children.
Thank you, Father. I want to, before we move on, then I will go to Peter in 1 minute. But I want to show again the book we are talking about. That is this one by myself, A Future in Tradition, Remembering Michael Davies. For the one that are interested, that they can understand Italian, I hope soon will be also an English translation. I want to suggest you the book by Monsignor Carlo Maria Viganò, Nell'ora della prova. This book is the only book written and by Monsignor Viganò, and we are in the course of having also the book available for the English audiences. Before I go on, I want to also suggest tomorrow is November 22, so it's Saint Cecilia. We will have a program in Italian for those of you that are lucky enough to understand Italian. And the program is this one, The Secret of Saint Cecilia. And we will have a musicologist and historian of art that will talk with me at 6 p.m. Italian time. Next week, also for the one of you lucky enough to understand Italian, we have a very nice program on a book on the Tridentine Mass. This is C'è troppo silenzio. There is too much silence. The youth of Tridentine Mass. I translate for the one that don't understand Italian. And we will have also Bishop Athanasius Schneider, Monsignor Books, and many other guests. Also, last thing, and then I will come to Peter. If you want to follow us, our channel, you can please sign to Ritorna Itaca on YouTube. On Twitter, you can follow me at Aurelio Porfiri. Facebook, there is my fan page. In all these three, we stream our programs. If you want to be updated about everything happening, go to Telegram and find my channel on Telegram. And please consider to support our effort. We want to make more English program. We make a lot of Italian, but we want to make more English. Please look our page on Patreon, Ritorno a Itaca. So sorry for this long talk, but Peter, you want to say something, please?
Yeah, I just simply wanted to point out that Michael Davies is doing rather well in terms of his books remaining in print. I mean, there are several of the books that are not in print, unfortunately, and should be brought back. But the great trilogy that was mentioned by Father Finnegan, Cranmer's Godly Order, which I'm holding up here, Pope John's Council, and Pope Paul's New Mass. This great trilogy, really mighty books and very, very influential, very important books. Still some of the best on these subjects. Those are in a beautiful new hardcover edition from Angelus Press. I don't work for them. They're not paying for me to advertise these. I'm just mentioning that to you. And then also the trilogy on Marcel Lefebvre was mentioned, and similarly, Angelus Press has put out the 3 volumes of that. That's volume 1, volume 2. I believe is here, and volume 3. So unfortunately, it's said that Michael was working on a 4th volume of this set in order to bring the story to completion, and I don't think we know what happened to it. Maybe he just simply never finished it. So it stops in midstream in a sense, but it's again a very important set of documentation. So I just want to mention that in terms of what's been published. I believe that his book on the arguing for the validity of the new rite of ordination, as well as for its weaknesses as a liturgical rite, the Order of Melchizedek, I believe that that's coming back into print soon from Roman Catholic books. So
okay. And I want now to address one of the topics that I talk in my book, and then Peter has just mentioned indeed. And the topic is this. When I met 20 years ago Michael Davies, the Pope was Saint John Paul II, and there was still this quite strong contrast between the Roman Catholic Church and St. Pius X fraternity. And so Marcel Lefebvre was, I don't want to say the big enemy, but almost, we may say. I feel, maybe Michael Davies, when he wrote 20 years ago, of course, he has to refer to the situation he knew at the time. But Joseph Shaw, I feel that now there is a different understanding about Marcel Lefebvre. It's more, how to say, it's not so big sin, to consider him for Catholic, of a certain kind, to consider him as an important figure and not as the schismatic person that caused the breaking. What do you feel? Do you think there is a change of perception, or you still think that the perception is almost the same?
There's certainly been a development. I remember when Pope Benedict, around the time when he lifted the excommunication of the 4 bishops that Archbishop Lefebvre consecrated, he referred to him as, addressing the Society of Pastoral, he said, "Your venerable founder." And that was quite a signal that this was a man that we could take seriously as a founder of religious order, as a writer, as a spiritual figure. And he, this isn't the damnation of memory, as the Romans said. And I think that was an important moment. What he did, what Lefebvre's fateful decision of not accepting that agreement that was offered to him, that's something which is always going to divide people. I mean, in 1,000 years' time, people will still be discussing whether he was justified in doing that. I remember talking about this with a priest of the Fraternity of St. Peter, and he said, well, of course, we think that he wasn't justified because otherwise we wouldn't be here. Everyone who's associated with the Fraternity of St. Peter has to think that he wasn't justified because that's why they did what they did in setting up their own society. And not everyone is as committed as that, of course, but it's going to be an issue which is always going to be open to discussion. I think that's, in fact, a particularly interesting thing because, like, St. Athanasius, we can say, well, even the saints didn't always, they weren't guided by the Holy Spirit in every single thing they did. So we can assess their actions. And they did sometimes shocking things, sometimes they made mistakes, but we can still say, well, if someone acted in good faith and did what they felt they had to do, then it's it's something which we can take seriously in a great historical figure.
Thank you, Father Kosick. I want to ask you to help me to understand something, even if you are not Italian, but I think you are someone that can help to understand something happening in Italy, and this. In Italy, we have a lot of problems. I mean, even in the Catholic Church, church parishes are closing, dioceses are also extinct because, or they are united with other dioceses because there is no more people, and people don't go to church. But for Italian bishops, when they meet, it seems that one of the greatest problems is the Latin Mass. So I never understood why, because also, it's not that a million of people go to the Latin Mass, and so they have a so big influence. In Rome, we have, I think, 1 or 2 churches. But why bishops have to be so afraid of the Latin Mass? You are a priest. I'm not a priest, so I cannot understand how the mind works. Why is a so big problem?
It's a good question. I should think that they would have bigger problems too. I just don't see this as a problem. I think a lot of it has to do with ignorance. They regard the attachment to the traditional rites as retrograde, as a rejection of the council altogether. Although we know that the council did not introduce any new doctrine or dogma to be believed by the faithful. It was generally considered a pastoral council. There were some dogmatic constitutions that settled some longstanding theological questions, but its attachment to the old mass in many places is seen as symbolic, emblematic of the rejection of the council. And here we are 50 years later, and I wish I were able to articulate a good response. They don't want to be seen as out of step with the current pontiff. I don't know.
But you know, Father, my point is that they always say to us that we have to welcome everyone and everything. No, we have to welcome everyone and everything, but they are so afraid about the Mass, the Latin Mass. So this is always, struck my attention. Why? I mean, we have to be welcoming to all other religions. We have to be welcoming to the atheist. We have to, but the Latin Mass, that is our own heritage, we have to be so scared. Why?
I think because it represents the traditional faith, unadulterated.
You think maybe this the reason? Because I always find this I think quite amusing, because I think we have we should be proud of our traditions, and this is not to say that there cannot be changes, but we should be. Please.
Yeah, I've been in conversations where we look where the church is flourishing, especially in France. It's in traditionalist circles. They're the ones with the families, the youth, the future, and I've heard people say, why can't the bishop see this? They do see this. They don't want success if that's what success means, because they don't espouse the traditional Catholic faith.
Oh, thank you. I want to ask Jules Gomez something. He come from, you say, from a Protestant background. And also Michael Davies, he wrote book dealing with this kind of issue. So how make you feel when you read this, the evaluation of Michael Davies about the Protestants and how they are, they diverge from the Catholic faith?
Well, I haven't read much of Michael Davies in terms of his divergence between Catholicism and Protestantism, but what I do know is that having come from Wales and then spent most of his life in England, he would have seen the trajectory of iconoclasm by progressives in the Church of England, which was targeted against Cranmer's 1549 and particularly the later 1662 Book of Common Prayer. And the great animosity against this traditionalist liturgical movement in the Church of England, if I may put it that way, was to a great extent, not just because of its language, because of its antiquity, because of its rootedness in scripture and tradition, but more importantly, because of its theology. So in the prayer of confession, for example, as in the traditional Latin Mass, you don't say, oh, sorry, Lord, I've just made a mistake. But you recognize the deep gravity of your sin, mea maxima culpa, and you plead repeatedly before the throne of Almighty God for forgiveness. There's a great emphasis on sacrifice. There's a great emphasis on the atonement. And liberals will brook, or leftists will brook, no alternative. And that is why, coming back to your previous question, by the way, to Father, they cannot tolerate a viable alternative, because the moment people see that there is a credible, viable alternative deeply rooted in tradition, more and more people, more and more Catholics hunger for that. Just as much as in the Church of England, people want tradition, people want a choral mass, for example. They don't want this kumbaya stuff that is driving more and more people away. And Michael Davies very, very astutely saw through all this.
Thank you. Father, Father Finnegan, I want to ask you, if Michael Davies was alive today, what do you think he will think about the situation we are living? Because you knew him, so maybe you have a better idea.
I think he would have some very acerbic things to say about the situation today. I can imagine his writing a very sarcastic piece about the McCarrick report, for example. Michael was very aware of the failures of people in authority in the church. I think he would have been disgusted beyond belief at some of the things which have been revealed in recent years, but not necessarily entirely surprised. Michael, I think he would have been very glad. It's Summorum Pontificum. It's such a shame. Both he and my father died before Summorum Pontificum was promulgated. I think it would have been an absolute joy for both of them. And I think he would have been delighted to see the growth of the church. I think one of the things he would have pointed out is the diversity within people who attend the Latin Mass. So the diversity of age, the diversity of ethnicity, and, well, not so much diversity, but the equality between men and women, that when you go to the traditional Latin Mass, you find that there are roughly the same number of men as there are of women, which is something you do not find when you attend the modern rite of Mass. I think there are a number of things he would have observed. And particularly, were he alive now, I can imagine he would have been a great entertainer with regard to the measures which have been introduced regarding the coronavirus. I think he too would have observed that where churches have reopened and in parishes where there are both forms of Mass, that nearly everybody has returned to the traditional Latin Mass, and about a fifth have returned to the modern rite of Mass, in such a way that at least 3 parishes that I've come across have had to put on an extra traditional Latin Mass to cope with the numbers because of the restriction of numbers and so on, where they haven't had to put on extra masses in the modern form. So I think he would certainly have observed those sorts of things. With Pope Francis, I think he would have been trying to talk people off the ledge. I think he would have accepted that Pope Francis is genuinely the Pope and would have rejected sedevacantism, but I think he obviously would have had things to say about the deficiencies of leadership that there are in the church today.
Thank you, Father. I want to remember our viewers that we are talking about Future in Tradition, Remembering Michael Davies. You find it in bookstores online, Amazon.com, and also Barnes & Noble in electronic format. And in Amazon, you find also the paperback version. So now I want to ask you one question that is for everyone. So, Michael Davies, it was in the full of Vatican II, of after Vatican II, we may say. I remember I saw in YouTube his own interview in the Firing Line, this program by William Buckley, or I think is the name. And it was very interesting, that program, because there was also another priest, and he gave him a very nice answer. I remember, I want even to play it today, but then I thought that maybe not, because can be some problem with the copyright. But if you want, you can go to YouTube. The program is called The Firing Line, and there is this Michael Davies interview that is very interesting. But what I want to say, here in Italy, in the last months, there is a lot of talk again about Vatican II. A lot, really. We have books. We have, I have to say, only my little publishing company, we are going to publish 2 books on Vatican II, one by a liturgist and another by a journalist. And then I will publish a book about the 6th chapter of the Sacrosanctum Concilium on sacred music with another publisher. So there is a lot of talking again. And I think this is a good thing, because Vatican II is the pink elephant, basically. It's something that you can never talk, but is indeed the only thing you should really talk, because it's what has caused everything we have now. You can be positive or negative about, but it's Vatican II. So, of course, Michael Davies had to struggle for all of his life with abuses coming from the interpretation of Vatican II. Do you know that there are different schools? People that blame Vatican II directly. Other people blame the interpretation of Vatican II. Okay, so we know all of these things. So we have no time to talk about all of this. So, Peter, but I want to tell you, do you know, and then everyone, this is a question for everyone, do you think that is a good thing that now we are able again to talk about Vatican II without having to feel uneasy, because you cannot touch Vatican II? No, Cardinal Ratzinger say like a super dogma. So you can never. What do you think about this? And then all the other on this question.
Sure. I mean, it's an extremely vexing question for many reasons, but first of all, we all know that the Second Vatican Council was unique in its whole manner of being announced and being explained, what it was supposed to be, a pastoral council, reinterpreting doctrine but not changing it, making it accessible to modern people, updating the church, the aggiornamento aspect. So it was doing something that none of the 20 earlier ecumenical councils did. They all met to create new canons and to condemn, anathematize errors, and to implement reforms, concrete reforms. Vatican II had this very ambitious, ambiguous, open-ended plan, which many people at the time were boasting they were going to utilize this to bring a kind of new church into existence that had never been before. That's kind of what Ratzinger was referring to with the super dogma comment. The thing I want to say is that the more years pass after Vatican II, the easier it is to talk about it and to be objective about it, simply because the people who were at the council, they have mostly died or they're extremely old. And the people, the first generation or the generations most influenced and shaped by the council, they're still very much in play. In fact, they hold the highest hierarchical positions in the church. But there are younger generations who have none of the baggage, so to speak, none of the psychological and sociological baggage of the council, who are looking at it and the event and the subsequent aftermath with fresh eyes and without prejudices. And they are able to see in something like Sacrosanctum Concilium, just to take an example that I know you care about a lot, we all care about. You can look at that document today and you can say, yes, this is a patchwork. This is a mixture of all kinds of ideas that are not compatible with each other. And if you press on certain principles, you're going to go in one direction. If you press on other paragraphs, you're going to go in a different direction. It's incoherent. It's an incoherent document. But we can see that now more clearly than 20 years ago. Nobody would have said that because it would have seemed impious.
But indeed, Peter, because we discussed already, me and Peter, we made a document, Cantate Domino Canticum Novum, on sacred music that have a great success. What was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we made that document. But that also Sacrosanctum Concilium, I remember my teacher, Cardinal Domenico Bartolucci, that he was the conductor of Sistine Chapel Choir, and he was very strong against all this new. He only celebrated the Latin Mass until the end. He never celebrated the new Mass. But he told me, but Sacrosanctum Concilium can can be also not so bad if well interpreted. I mean, indeed, there you have Gregorian chant, you have polyphony, you can Latin is the language. So I mean, of course, you have the issue of participation, but it's not so strong in the sense that if you read Sacrosanctum Concilium and you see what happened in our churches, it seems like the people is following another religion, because Sacrosanctum Concilium has never said that.
The only thing I would point out is simply that chapter 6 is the strongest chapter in the whole document, the one on sacred music, because Monsignor, was it Overat? Yeah, he fought to get some kind of traditional on sacred music in that document. But I'm just talking about what Christopher Ferrara calls the loopholes in the document. All of the windows of opportunity that are left for, the bishops' conference can do this, and this can be, it's very loose. It's loosey-goosey, as we say. It's not, so anyway, but.
Yeah. Joseph, so your point on this return of interest for Vatican II.
Yes, I'm interested to hear you say that it's being talked about in Italy. Not long ago, of course, we had the 50th anniversary, and a lot of people noticed that it wasn't being commemorated officially, except in a very, very quiet way. And I thought that was very interesting. One comment on social media that I noticed, which I thought might explain it, is that someone said, well, they don't want to remind people that it was only 50 years ago. They don't remind people this whole mass and everything. It was the anniversary of the of the Novus Ordo Missae. That's right, 1970. That it was so recent. If you think about the history of the church, we've had nearly 2,000 years since our Lord's Passion, and Vatican II, the Vatican II era is the blink of an eye in relation to that history. And what worries me about this, the new theology is the ease with which the people who adopt this say things like, oh well, everything that came before Vatican II was essentially bad. And it's amazing how they really do say this. They say this about what happened in the religious life. It was all bad. It was terrible and oppressive and everything. They said about every aspect of theology, and, ethics, and sacramental theology. And we don't believe all that stuff anymore. But if they really thought that, if they thought it through, then they'd realise, the people saying this, that regardless of whether it's justified by this document or that document in the 1960s, it actually means they don't believe in the church. It means that the church has disappeared as a carrier of truth, and that's what the Vatican II problem is. The discontinuity which is claimed by its most ardent defenders. There is, of course, a reading of the documents which gets around that problem, because you say, oh, well, you just ignore this passage and you look at this passage instead. And well, that's fine. But that isn't how it's being read by an awful lot of people who are influential, people who are teaching catechism, people who've got chairs of Catholic theology, and so on. And my feeling is that's the problem. And that problem has become, if anything, more acute as the time has gone on, because the polite fiction, which we've had for a long time, that, oh, it's okay because, well, we can kind of read it in this way, I think that's wearing thin. As people are becoming, there's more time has gone past, there's greater degree of freedom, as we've been talking about it, then people can say, well, actually, there is a problem, and either it's a problem which they want to have because they don't like all the old stuff, or it's a problem which they don't want to have.
Thank you. Father Kosik, you are a scholar about the liturgical movement, and you also we also published one of your book, Singing a Song, where you talk about the liturgical movement. You are a priest, so how you deal with this issue of Vatican II? Because this is, I think, really the issue, whatever the opinion, but is there is no doubt that Vatican II is a turning point. So how you deal with this?
Well, the point was made earlier that 50 plus years later, the council is simply not in the consciousness of most Catholics. I think it was Father George Rutler, another convert from Anglicanism, who said, for young people today, Vatican II reposes in a haze with Florence, or it might as well be the Second Council of Nicaea or the Council of Florence. It's ancient history. The young people, people of a certain age, they're not carrying that baggage, as was mentioned earlier. They wouldn't regard an interest in or attachment to the more ancient Mass, to the traditional rites, as being anti-conciliar or pre-conciliar, because that's just not in their mind, that this is a pro or anti-council issue. I'm not sure that I landed on what you were asking.
Yes.
How do I handle Vatican II? I don't know what you mean quite by that.
I mean, you are a priest that certainly give attention to the tradition, but you live in a church. We live in a church that seem in many of its priests oppose this tradition. So you have to live in this environment caused by the interpretation of Vatican II. So how you deal?
Yeah, that's probably the chief problem with the council, the ambiguity built into the documents. They're capable of progressive reading. They're capable of a more traditionalist understanding. And I know where that comes from. It comes from the different theological schools. You had the ressourcement coming together with scholasticism and compromise documents to keep everyone happy. And so yeah, there are ambiguities. That's one of the biggest problems with Sacrosanctum Concilium, that one can say, well, this legitimizes the retention of Latin and Gregorian chant, but at the same time, it opens the door for all other things.
Thank you. Jules Gomez, I want to ask you something about the relationship between Vatican II and evangelization. Well, what you can say about that?
I grew up in India, and the Catholic Church in India, Catholicism and Christianity, came to India 2,000 years ago. And it was one of the most vibrant, thriving churches in the world. And missionaries went through the length and breadth of India and converted millions of Indians to the Catholic faith. However, after Vatican II, the hierarchy of the Catholic Church in India imposed a moratorium on evangelization. The problem is so serious that bishops and theologians have bought into religious pluralism completely, constantly quoting or misquoting Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium and some of the other documents. And their new definition of evangelization is making a Hindu a better Hindu. So this sort of nonsense has decimated missionary activity in India. And I see this in Rome as well when I go to press conferences at the Vatican on mission, and I ask them these questions. How many people are being brought to Jesus Christ, being brought into the Catholic Church? And all I get is very, very evasive answers from top priests and cardinals. And then, of course, even more serious is the almost direct link between what Vatican II says about Islam and the Abu Dhabi document, the declaration between Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmed Al-Tayeb. where Christianity and the fundamentals of our Catholic faith have been totally compromised, in my opinion, in this so-called human fraternity declaration, something, by the way, which Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, had a lot to say about in what he talked about on how he defined brotherhood and fraternity.
Thank you. I want to ask Father, about this issue of Vatican II, what has to be our approach? Because I think that this new perspective of Vatican II will give people the say about many of the issues that are not going well. So how we have to put ourselves in the regard of this council. You know, there are people, I tell you, there are people that are very extremist, and they say, oh, they should cancel the Vatican II. But I even if I may not like, but I don't think it's possible. I mean, the church can say, oh, we joke. Sorry, now no Vatican II, we return to 1961. So what should be our attitude?
Well, when I first started teaching, I've done a lot of teaching during my priestly life, as well as being a parish priest all the time until last year. It was always mandatory, really, to mention Vatican II a lot of the time. In any particular subject, you had to show the teaching of Vatican II on that subject. And of course, as I hope, an Orthodox teacher, I would show to pick parts of Vatican II that were very clear and orthodox. But I think that's become less. And I think what you were speaking of, particularly in Italy, and I think it is a particularly Italian thing, because you have the Bologna school there,
yeah.
And there's a particular move to talk about Vatican II more, whereas probably in England and especially in the United States, there's much more of a tendency to question Vatican II. What I think would be good, you spoke of a new perspective. I think it would be quite good if we use that English phrase to put it in perspective, which one or two people have done already. The Vatican II is one council among very many. It's not a super dogma. It's not the council above all others. It's one council among many. And Cardinal Ratzinger, the then Cardinal Ratzinger, in his Principles of Theology, did say, I remember quoting him at the Latin Mass Society conference one year, he said, not all councils are of equal value. And his example was the Fifth Council of the Lateran. And he said, this was called on the very eve of the Reformation and did nothing whatever to stop it. Rather mischievously, Father Hunnick, who was on the same panel, then interrupted and mentioned the Second Council of Vienne, which mandated the burning of homosexuals. And Father Hunnick said, well, I don't think that we would want to promote the spirit of Vienne, whether people promote the spirit of Vatican II. So councils, sometimes we have to leave some things behind with particular councils. And in the case of the Second Vatican Council, I don't think we need to kind of continue to cheerlead for it as one of the greatest things that ever happened. Nor can we say, well, we put the clock back. Well, we can't go back to a previous time, but we can, of course, put the clock back if it means going back to having larger queues for confession, going back to having bursting churches for mass, going back to having sound preaching that people can expect every time they go into a church. It'd be nice to go back to some of those things, whether they're the absence of them is directly the result of Vatican II is one of those questions of cause and correlation, whether post hoc is necessarily propter hoc. But it does look rather suspicious that all these things happened at the same time. And just as we have graphs for coronavirus now, and people argue over them, there are graphs for when the number of baptisms started to plummet, when the number of marriages plummeted, when the number of ordinations plummeted. They all seem to happen just after Vatican II. It may not be entirely a coincidence.
Thank you, Father. We are going to the end, but I have one question for everyone, last question. So, and in this, in my book, I also have spoken to other protagonists of the post-conciliar time, that also fight for, even if they were not strictly for the Latin Mass, but they fight the abuses, we say. And I mentioned myself, I remember in the book, Romana Merio, that wrote that book Iota Unum, that is fundamental for me, one of the most important book of the last decades. And then I mentioned Divo Barzotti, that unfortunately in the Anglo-Saxon world is not well known, but is really a giant of spirituality. And I want to mention to you that is available now, one of his masterwork in English, because we translated and published it, that is called The Motionless Escape. And then the other one I mentioned is Plinio Correa de Oliveira, that is a Brazilian thinker and the founder of Tradition Family Property Association, that is also another very important protagonist of this reaction against the abuses. So I want to ask you, beside Michael Davies, that all we admire, what is for you, or what are for you the most influential person in these last 50 years that help us to have a better understanding of what is going on and to react properly? So start with Peter.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we've already said some of the main names. I mean, certainly Klaus Gamber and Michael Davies himself. Laszlo Dobje is a name that hasn't come up yet, but a kind of, I think, an unsung hero who did some very important work on the liturgy, Romano Amerio. But one author who was very important for me in recent years is a man named Henry Cyr, who I'm sure you've all heard of him, mainly because of his book, The Dictator Pope. But I'm referring to his book called Phoenix from the Ashes, which, I mean, it's not, I have disagreements with some few points in it. And I think that Joseph Shaw also does have some disagreements with it. But what I found in Cyr's book, Phoenix from the Ashes, was a really sweeping vision of the paradoxical combination in church history of massive chaos with divine providence and the triumph of orthodoxy. These things go together in many crisis moments throughout church history, at least 7 major crises before the one that we're in right now. And in the midst of those moments of crisis, it looks like everything has failed, everything has collapsed. We should just pack up and go home. And in point of fact, somehow miraculously, orthodoxy does triumph. And I think that we're going to see that if we live long enough.
Thank you. And Joseph, so what will be your name?
Sorry, Aurelio, what was exactly is the question?
So in my book, I mentioned several people beside Michael Davies that have a very great influence on many of us, because they help us to understand where the Catholic Church was going. So I mentioned Romana Merio and Plinio Correa de Oliveira. So for you, what will be, beside Michael Davies, the people?
Well, different people are influenced by different authors. It depends partly on how much you know and what you know when you find a particular author. But one author who was very influential to me at a critical moment, rather than the way that Michael Davies was, Martin Moserbach.
Yes.
His book, The Heresy of Formlessness, I think is a really, I mean, it's rather quirky, but it's truly great contribution to the debate. And I think that's really very important. What he says about the nature of the liturgy, why the traditional liturgy kind of makes sense in a conceptual level, not just the individual bits of it, but the whole thing.
Well, thank you very much. Moserbach also is indeed also a very nice person. Also, I met him. I met him once in a conference, and he asked to talk to me because he wanted to tell me something to tell to Cardinal Zen. I remember, and he was very nice. I mean, very, very humble person. So, and I also agree with you that book. The I don't know in English the name, but in Italian is L'eresia dell'informe, no, the one you mentioned.
The heresy of formlessness.
Oh, the formless, yes. Oh, the formless, yes. That is really very good book. Really, really interesting. And Father Kosick. So, what will be the name you would suggest?
Somebody on this panel may be embarrassed. With regard to the liturgy specifically, I mentioned early on that Michael Davies exerted a strong influence on my thinking, as did Martin Mosenbach. And this is the book that was just referenced, The Heresy of Formlessness. It's come out in a revised and expanded edition by, I believe, Ignatius Press. And László Dobzsé, the late Hungarian musicologist and scholar, The Restoration and Organic Development of the Roman Rite. Dr. Kwasniewski had mentioned him too. More broadly, I mean by that I mean not just as regards the liturgy, but more broadly speaking, my conversion to tradition. I would have considered myself a conservative, or in favor of a conservative interpretation of the council. Now I regard myself as more as a traditionalist. I no longer espouse the agenda of reforming the reform. I think that simply won't work from within the context of the Novus Ordo. I've become a traditionalist, and Dr. Kwasniewski's own writings, his vast output of writings, has brought me along those lines, has made a traditionalist out of me with regard to all of the other issues too, including the ones not directly bearing on the liturgy. And I want to recommend his book, Tradition and Sanity, that came out, Conversations and Dialogues of a Post-Conciliar Exile.
Yes, and thank you. And indeed, I can say that you promote the book of Peter, where also there are 2 interviews I did to him. So I also promote the book where there are 2 interviews I did with him for Oclarim, or 3 interviews. Maybe I don't remember, but some interviews we did together. So Jules Gomes. So what will be for you the people that you will suggest?
Well, for me, one of the most important influences has been Professor Roberto De Mattei.
Okay.
The great Catholic Italian historian.
Yes.
Because he brings together an amazing breadth of knowledge and diversity of interests that all intersect, beginning with his remarkable work on Vatican II, and then which actually Joseph Shaw recommended to me. But then also his incisive take on liturgy, theology, but like many people who have influenced me, his own holy living and his the transformation of his own life, thanks to the traditionalist movement. And may I say here, it's at this point, I think I personally and a lot of other people, particularly people looking from outside into Catholicism, people who are considering converting to Catholicism, they're not looking so much at the big names, but they are looking at you, the people I am talking to in this room, in the studio at the moment, Peter and Joseph and our 2 priests and you, Aurelio, and they're saying these are the people who are making a difference. They're looking at holy priests who are leading traditionalist parishes. They're looking at the families who are going with their father, mother, children, and they're saying, this is what we have desired all along, and we finally found it here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And Father Finnegan, what will be for you the people that are influential?
Yes, I think I go back, a little longer than some people, and I remember those who promoted orthodoxy in general in the dark years of the 1970s and the early 80s. So people like Christopher Dawson, Dietrich von Hildebrand, great characters, not necessarily associated explicitly with the traditional mass. Hamish Fraser, another great figure. These people, if you like, kept the flame of faith alive. But in more recent times, and I think really the question that is being asked, those who are most influential at this time that we're in post-Summorum Pontificum, and during the troubles in the church that we have at the moment, I really would have acted courageously and with tremendous influence through the church to put heart, particularly into priests. I've met them both, and on several occasions, and every time I meet them, I feel warm again. That something's happening within the church, and wonderful to have these great examples. So I would pick them as a priest.
Thank you. I was a little surprised that no one has mentioned Cardinal Sarah. That also for many is very influential about the return to a certain reverence in the liturgy, and so I want to mention him as Peter knows, because I sent to him the letter we wrote together, and I met him in the Vatican for 1 hour. I was supposed to meet him for 10 minutes. They told me, he can only meet you for 10 minutes. And then we talked for 1 hour. And he is really in favor of good sacred music. He insists to me and say, don't give up, resist. But you know that the resistance, it's almost impossible now, because everyone is against. So I want to tell you just a little story that tell you what is really the situation, and then we conclude. Few weeks ago, because I have some health problems in this year, and a few weeks ago I go to a parish where I was organist and where I grew up, and they have my CD, so they know who I am. And I told the new pastor, I say, please, pastor, I want to start to play again the organ because I don't feel well before. I need to do something. And the pastor say, okay, but there is no one that can sing. And I say, okay, pastor, don't worry. I can play the organ during the moment like offertory or communion. And he say, it's not possible. And I say, sorry, why is not possible? And he told me, because during the mass, the organ cannot be played alone. And I say, Father, but this is true in Lent. But during the year, I think you can play the organ for himself. He say, he told me, do you want to teach a priest how to say the mass? I say, sorry, Father, but I wrote like 50 books. Most of them are in liturgy and sacred music, so I know also something. So this is the situation. Really, everyone decide for himself. Yes. So that priest doesn't like the organ played alone, and so he decide for the whole church. So he said that's not the liturgy. So he said it was not possible. So the situation is really dramatic, really dramatic. I mean, it's a disaster, really disaster. Here, the parish where I start to play, now they remove the parish because no one go there. So the situation is really sad. So I really think, and I hope that my book, and of course, everyone you mentioned, my book on Michael Davies will help people to reconnect with this great figure, so that has taught us something important that we should not lose. So I want to remember to everyone about a future in tradition, remembering Michael Davies. And I want to thank you all for participating to this live streaming. And I think it was very, very interesting. So thank you, Peter Kwasniewski.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, Aurelio.
Thank you. Thank you to Joseph Shaw.
Thank you, Aurelio.
Thank you to Father Finnegan.
Grazie, buonanotte.
Buonanotte. Thank you to Jules Gomez.
Grazie mille.
Thank you to Father Kosick.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Buonanotte.
Buonanotte. Thank you. My pleasure. So thank you also to our viewers. They've commented in all the social media. So I ask my guests to wait 1 minute after I end the program. So thank you again, and see you, if you can understand Italian, tomorrow. We speak about Saint Cecilia. Tomorrow is the feast of musician, our patroness Saint Cecilia. So we will speak about Saint Cecilia, and next week we speak about a book on the Trident in Mass, 5 p.m. with Bishop Athanasius Schneider and Monsignor Books and other guests. So thank you again, and bye-bye.
Ciao.